Good afternoon, attendees. Welcome to the presentation today by the Healthcare Authority, the RSS staff of the dynamic team of Darren Paschke and Don Miller. It is time to jump into more about IPS, Report of Employment, and the SUD SE focus today. We're still waiting for others to join us, but we wanted to just check in to see who's the audience right now. It looks like Carly and Dwayne. Can you hear us okay?
And since it's just the two of them, I may just unmute everybody from this end if I can do that. I see Dwayne raising his hand. Let me see. Okay, with any luck, I unmute, although it still looks like they're muted.
Muted.
Oh. Does that work? Unmute all attendees? Good afternoon, everybody. I tried to unmute everybody, and I just was wondering if that worked.
It did.
Yay, success. And you are?
I'm Teresa. I work with Dwayne and Carly. I did register, but Dwayne mentioned that he had to register twice. So.
Well, welcome to the broadcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
At this point in time, we have Carly, Dwayne, Teresa, and Kel. And I think I've been speaking on mute. So the unmute only works if you mute from your end.
I just figured out how to unmute myself, so I'm here too.
Oh, good job.
Welcome, Dwayne.
Thank you. Good to hear you, Darren.
Thanks.
We are going to be a small group today, and it may be that we'll just leave you unmuted in general because it's going to be a small group. We'll see how that goes. If it gets too noisy, then we'll mute everybody again, but it'll make it easier to ask questions if we just leave you unmuted. You can just opt to, you know, ask the question verbally if you'd like.
Yeah, with such a small, intimate group, Don and I definitely want to be available for questions, and we have a lot of information to cover, and it's always great to have dialogue and questions. So there's the question box in the menu that you can shoot some questions out to us that we'll monitor along the presentation, and definitely we'll try to look for the hand signal to unmute so that we could have some live chat on the presentation today.
So one of the other things is, and Darren and I were just discussing, there's a lot of information. We've got quite a lot of slides. One of the things that I would like to know is how much IPS knowledge does each of you have? Because we're intending to kind of present this as the very basics. We want to know if that's the kind of the appropriate level to present information at. And then also wanted to say, because there's kind of a lot of information in the slides, we may not get to all of them. We added more verbiage to each slide than we might normally do, with the thought that this is a resource tool for you. It will allow you to go back and read through things and refresh your memory in regards to what was said. So if you could please go ahead and type in the chat box, or unmute yourself and tell us verbally kind of what's your knowledge level related to IPS.
For me, this is Dwayne, because I've been on the review team.
Uh-oh.
Oh, we lost you for just a sec there, Dwayne.
Unmute. Attendees will full audio control.
Okay, am I back on now?
You're back.
Yes, you
on.
are.
Yes.
Okay, I'm just going to share that because I've been on the review teams that I do have some knowledge of the IPS model. It's very good, very valuable to know.
Good. I see Kel says moderate knowledge, and Carly, I think Carly, you showed up twice, so I'm not sure if that's you or somebody that's also using your login, which is fine. That's not a problem. Says I've taken some basic training, but it's been a while, and I'm excited for the review. So sounds like more of the team than not might be a little more than basic, which is what we're going to try and speak to as we're doing our presentation today. Just know that the slides have a lot of information in them that you can use as you need to go back for a refresher. We wanted to do that for you to make it a tool rather than just something that isn't going to get used. So with that, it's 6 minutes after. Says this is Teresa and I'm using Carly's sign-in. That's absolutely fine, Teresa. Not a problem at all. Good to know that you're there, though. I know when we print out the attendance list, it will print out per who you signed in under. And so it is especially good to know that there's not two Carlys. There's a Carly and a Teresa. And it looks like we had Nicole join us as well.
Yay for Team Micron.
Woohoo! All right. So why don't we go ahead and get started? Please feel free to ask questions as we go if there are things that come up that you have questions about. So we're going to talk about basic IPS principles, and we're going to talk about some tools and just dive a little bit deeper into each of the individual principles. So that's kind of where we're going to be at today.
As Don mentioned, there are some different training objectives that we have, and it's really good that some folks already have some hands-on experience. I know Dwayne's been on a couple of IPS Fidelity reviews with me, so he definitely has quite a few hands-on experiences. But we're going to focus on basic understanding of the IPS and learn about some of the tools available to help us implement this process of evidence-based practices, and look at some of those elements and changes in the current culture and structure of our agency that can really lead to a higher fidelity alliance. And this slide deck, hopefully you can use as a resource that will send out after the presentation to go back and do some references. But Don and I are actually great resources as well, and there'll be our contact information at the end of the presentation. So this is all about reinforcing our learning collaborative that Don and I are working to achieve. And this takes time. It's a very structured process with a lot of moving parts. And as you make these changes in an organization, it'll also take time for other units to adapt to this model and build a more robust program. And we're always available for consultation. So please just reach out and connect with us if you have any questions or even some comments about how we do the fidelity reviews and some of our presentations. I'm always looking for feedback and how we move through this process.
Mm-hmm. Feedback is a gift.
So this next slide is about tools and resources. How come it's not going? There we go. Sorry, operator failure.
So one of the tools available to you, and Darren, I can't see slide numbers anymore, so I'm just going to punt. You tell me if I'm on even or odd. How about that? One of the tools
Well, you're on
available.
odd.
we're also going to have some fun today. I don't know that we mentioned that, but you know what? Training doesn't have to be boring. So we're going to have some fun today too. The IPS library is one of the tools available to you. And the actual web address, which is in a later slide, is ipsworks.org. Within it, there are the different manuals that we use. And the Fidelity Reviewers Manual is actually downloadable. There are the Fidelity Scale. There are various white papers. There was one, I'm from Moses Lake, and in fact, that's where I'm speaking from as this progresses, is from Moses Lake. And so one of the things that I saw that was of interest to me was a white paper related to doing job development in a rural community. So I would highly recommend you to take a look at the IPS library and spend a little time browsing. The library itself, there's a search tool where you can go in and put in the title of something and hopefully find it. If not, it may be because it doesn't exist or you haven't come up with the right name, but still a fairly good or robust, as Darren would say, search tool. It's got videos that are in the library as well. So some of the videos that are in there are related to Fidelity reviews and what the interviews might look like. There are opportunities for training, and I will say that Darren and I are working on a project where we're going to send staff from agencies that sign up for the opportunity to potentially attend one of the online IPS trainings. And we're still working out the details of that, so I'm not entirely sure how it will look, but there are online trainings available. There's videos, there's documents, there's newsletters. There are opportunities to connect with other people as well. Next slide, Darren.
It gives opportunity to sign up for the newsletter for IPS, just to get some updates and changes that they're implementing throughout the WestStat IPS system. Did you want to do this one, Dawn, and then we'll get back on track?
Remember on that one, what do you know? Yeah, I'll be a slide hog. I can do that, obviously. So one of the other tools that is incredibly helpful is the Pathways to Employment website. You can see, if you look, the far left has a list of tabs within the page. The benefits estimator is one that we encourage agencies to use. So many agencies don't have certified benefits planners. This benefits estimator is a tool that allows individuals to put in their actual benefits, the amount that they have coming in, maybe for SSI or SSDI, or if they have housing vouchers or whatever. And at the end, it produces an idea of what's going to happen to their benefits when they go to work. It's not an absolute. It doesn't take the place of a certified benefits planner, but it does give a pretty good idea of which benefits will be impacted and how. So that's one of the things we encourage. You can see it has things like work near my home. So if somebody is doing a little more in the way of independent job search, they can actually pull up a map of businesses near their address. Behavioral health, justice involved, youth and transition, voc rehab, variety of great tabs. One of the things as an agency that you may use is that supported employment tab on the bottom also has a tab within it, a sub-tab about forms. And there are things like the tracking form that we've encouraged agencies to at least consider using to track individuals on their caseloads. It has columns for things like start date, date of first employer contact. And really the form was put together using the Fidelity Scale so that all the dates you need to track, you can track. You'll maybe notice individual work plan is on there. That's related to ticket to work, so probably not something that you're going to use. Could be, but probably not. So get to know this particular website as well. One of the things under continuing education, there are 4 2-hour webinars on benefits planning. that were done by WISE staff a couple of years ago. Quite good. One on SSI, one on SSDI, one on, I think it's hidden ABD and something or another else. And then trying to remember, Darren, what the fourth one is. 8 hours worth of training at any rate that you can access on demand, because the links to the training are actually on the website.
Yeah, it's a lot of great information, and as you can see at the bottom, there's also a Pathways to Housing, and they have a nice tool to help people set up a budget. So as part of the benefit education piece, you can also use some of that template in Pathways to Housing to really assist the job seekers in terms of benefits and also setting a budget for when they do return to work. This next slide is just, you know, some of the resources that we share a lot and that we talk about a lot. We just mentioned the Pathways to Employment and Housing website. Those are great links, a lot of detailed information. We also have something called our Supportive Employment Wiki, where it's a compilation of information that we put resources. We also encourage other people to sign up for that. To get access to all the resources that we have about IPS and FCS and some benefit information. Is a great tool to access as well, particularly starting out into the supportive employment. There's just a lot of data information in there to take a look at as you learn the IPS and supportive employment model to help people get back to work. And again, the IPS works where I have the manual, some training modules. You can be part of the IPS community through WestStat, sign up for that newsletter to get even more information and learn about some of the new things that they're implementing and doing within the research world to even add to the current 28 different studies that they've done to support the IPS philosophy. They're focusing on some child and youth focus as well as substance abuse, and I think those projects are already underway. There's also the FCS Provider Manual. Encourage everybody to take a look at that, become familiar with that, especially for those agencies who are looking to onboard new staff. There's some very valuable information there for the level of education and some of the expectations for pre-employment and post-employment services. There's also reports and resources, you know, that are available, and definitely also the provider map, which can be really useful to share with other providers if you have a person move to another part of the county or through the state. They can see where they can hook up with additional resources for eligible FCS partners. And now we're getting ready to actually jump into the IPS principles. Click. So IPS has 25 different elements. And to start out in terms of matching with the foundational community supports, we're focusing on these 8 principles of employment. All 25 are very critical in terms of adhering to the IPS model, but we feel these are like 8 elements that you can begin with the culture change, training staff, really getting focused on how the IPS model works to help people return to employment.
Well, and the different 25 principles actually fall under each of those 8 in some fashion or another. I think it just helps us to condense kind of what it is that we're looking at and what it is that we're discussing. This is one of my favorite slides. In the SUD world, recovery has been a principle that's been accepted for a long while, less so in the mental health world. Now that we're behavioral health and addressing both and the whole person in kind of one set of services, it makes a whole lot more sense to discuss recovery as a whole. Employment, I say, equals recovery. Employment had always just seemed in the past to be a nicety. There were a lot of issues like readiness and being prescriptive and non-individualized that were a part of older school supported employment. Within IPS says employment is treatment. And within kind of modern day recovery, employment is treatment. It's a piece of what we get to do that's a treatment focus, which is why you get to bill for services under Medicaid that are supported employment related. It's a social determinant of health. It's now been recognized as one of those determinants that can impact your health longevity. There's a study that I've seen, and it sort of boggles my mind, and I had a little hard time wrapping my head around it until I started kind of deconstructing it. But that lack of employment, ongoing lack of employment, has caused individuals in some cases to live 25 years shorter lifespan than those of us that are typically employed. When you think about it, if you don't have money to buy good food, money to maybe go to the doctor if your medical doesn't cover, or if you don't have medical right at the moment, roof over your head, transportation, all those things that the money from employment can buy, then of course you're going to not have as long a life, and certainly your quality of life isn't going to be anywhere as good. One of the things that I have said often as another issue is if you have worries about money, and you do on SSI or SSDI, very honestly, people on either of those benefits are doomed to poverty still. But if you have worries about money and where it's going to come from and trying to meet all of your needs without that kind of thing, it impacts your mental health most decidedly. I've always said that SSI and SSDI could go away. If you've heard anyone say that Social Security is going to dry up, guess what's going to go along with it? SSDI. Social Security disability is likely to go along with it when Social Security dries up, if it does. SSI has been on the governor's list of programs to cut at least to some degree on a number of budgets in the past. And so we don't do anybody any favor by letting them think that SSI or SSDI is their forever income. We do them a favor if we help them consider employment. IPS says employment is treatment. It's individualized, strength-based, evidence-based, relationship-based. IPS really is about some pretty common sense kinds of things. Building a relationship with the person, building a relationship with employers, kind of trading on those relationships in order to help to make good job matches. A lot of really important common sense-based principles within the principles. Advocating for recovery is advocating for employment. And obviously I'm a little biased when I say that, but it's starting to have more favor in the behavioral health community that employment is one of the really key concepts of recovery. Next slide, please, Darren.
Thank you, Don. I just want to add another part of this process is that relationship between different departments and staff within your own organization, because that's where you can really develop those referral networks and support a job seeker transitioning into the community, transitioning into a job, or those job retention pieces as well. So we're going to jump into the first principle of IPS supportive employment. And the focus is on, competitive employment, that there's multiple strategies within this element. And the first step is in the intake that the agency has. Is there something about an interest in employment? We're not just looking to see, is Darren employed or not, but is Darren, what's his degrees? What's something he's interested in? Is he looking to go back to work? Is he looking for support to maintain employment right now? So it's not really that yes or no checkbox, but actually some questions that are focusing about interest in employment, where they want to go, maybe finishing up some education through supportive education, or returning to a job field, or getting some specialty certification to enhance their employability out in the job market. And also that there's ongoing questions about employment on annual, semi-annual reports. So this could be within your treatment plans, 6-month follow-up with treatment plans. Some organizations that actually have every 3 months that I've seen. There's some other tools that could be incorporated in this process as well, in terms of monitoring that interest and that it's, you know, shared within the team, and have access across the team for that.
And I will say, also related to agency focus on competitive employment, it talks about questions in the intake. Part of what that means is that the intake is not just a supported employment intake. It's the intake for the whole agency, because that's part of what helps the whole agency to focus on competitive employment. If you're a program that has an SUD component, a mental health component, maybe you have crisis services that have an intake, maybe, you know, all these different programs have an intake. The intent is that intake is the same one used for crisis services, for mental health, for substance use, for housing, whatever programs you have in your agency. The intent is that there are questions in it about employment to help spread the word, so that the agency shows a focus on competitive employment, and that individuals receiving services have the opportunity to ask about it, to access it if it's something that they need. We talk about written postings. For the latest Fidelity reviews that we've done, when we used to do them face-to-face, we would take a tour of the agency. We would see what the postings were. One of the changes we've had to make is, now that we're doing virtual Fidelity reviews, we've had to ask agencies to send us a picture of their lobby. So kind of just one of the many changes we've had to make to move from face-to-face to more virtual. Agency supports ways for individuals to share stories with other individuals and staff. I will say that as a brand new job developer 25 years ago, I didn't have as strong a belief in the ability of people with behavioral health issues to be successfully employed. And the more success stories I saw over the years, the more that I knew not only was it a possibility, it was a reality. And that's a big part of what this sharing of success stories is about. It's about educating others. It's about getting the buy-in. It's about sharing hope. It's about the belief that people in recovery can, in fact, work effectively. And an agency measuring rate of competitive employment, once again, because this is about the whole agency thing, it's not just the people in the supported employment program, it's anyone within the agency receiving services, and are they employed, and what kind of data does that show? Next slide, please, Darren.
Well, I just wanted to add something about the agency support ways for clients to share stories. Definitely working with some of the SUD agencies already. Some of that is already incorporated into that recovery process within the SUD. And I've talked to agencies about taking that strategy and making sure it's enhanced throughout the whole organization. So there's already, I'm sure there's already some robust things going on at that level in terms of stories, people coming back from groups, or people coming back and sharing their success with other members of the agency, but also to kind of find a way to make that agency-wide for extending that recognition. I've talked about communication. I've talked a little bit about culture change. IPS focuses on that relationship building that Dawn mentioned a little bit earlier. And one way is to really integrate with the other treatment teams within the organization, or that could be external organizations also providing support for that job seeker, and looking at ways that you can have that communication and learn about, maybe there's things on the treatment plan that they're working on that are going to directly impact the work that you have with that individual as you work with them to return to work, and making sure everybody's on the same client-centered progress, right? To acknowledge those strengths and those abilities and work together to support them, because IPS can be a real tremendous safety net for folks when everybody's working together and work on this level of integration, so that clinical goals and rehab goals and personal goals that the individual has, and that education is with that, can all come together. And sometimes it's really critical, even with the benefit education piece, that everybody's on the same page in terms of what income will impact what benefits, which could impact food, housing, even treatment that they do at the other facility or yours as well. So definitely ways to incorporate how information is shared. And this is above just going to meetings and talking about updates, but kind of more shared decision making, that we're all helping to improve the individual's level of functioning and that complex recovery process to meet those goals that we capture during the initial career profile intake process. Okay, back to you, Dawn.
So within the Fidelity Scale, for those of you who haven't seen it, items are, on the 25 items, they're rated from 1 to 5. Sometimes those are just a gradient, you know, you did this much, you get a 1, this percent gets you a 2, this percent gets you a 3. With others of the items in the Fidelity Scale, they're like this one, where in fact you have bulleted items that the score represents how many bulleted items are present. So when this talks about treatment team collaboration, the expectation would be attend weekly mental health treatment team meetings or substance use treatment team meetings in this case. Actively participate, as Darren said, with shared decision making. Documentation is integrated in a file where other providers within the agency can see what's going on with the individual. So in other words, anyone that's working with, say, Dawn, if I'm receiving services from you, if I have a counselor and if I have a case manager and an employment specialist, they would need to have access to the documents that are supported employment. And I bring that up only because in electronic health records, my limited knowledge is that you can set it up so that that only the person writing the note has the access, or it can be set up so that anyone receiving services or providing services, to the individual can access. And this is really about anyone providing services to the person can access the supported employment records. Employment specialist office in close proximity or shared with treatment team members. The Fidelity Reviewer Manual even goes as far as to say if it's a multi-story building, you have to be on the same floor, which I find interesting. But it makes sense. You think about the water cooler conversations or the bathroom conversations that you say, oh my gosh, I forgot to tell you about such and such that's going on with this person or that person. And so it makes perfect sense. And then the fifth item being employment specialist helps the team to think about employment for people who have not yet been referred to supported employment services. So for this particular Fidelity item, in order to get a 5, all 5 of those components would need to be present. All 5 of them have a great importance. Next slide, please, Darren.
Yeah, I'll just add to the office proximity that when I was running an supported employment program, we were actually in different buildings, but once we were in the same building on the same floor with the clinical team, people come by and check in and chat more. So sometimes I was thinking, well, maybe proximity isn't really that important, but it's, as Dawn mentioned, sometimes that water cooler, coffee break, people kind of just come over and knock to check in with you. And I've gone to some agencies where they can like literally just pop their head out the door and then talk to somebody in an office, you know, right next to them. So it just kind of really focuses on that development and that culture of sharing information and really working close together. So treatment team integration, definitely we're talking about the relationship building, we're talking about communication, we're talking about ways to build this up. You know, IPS has a very, you know, specific element to every piece of the model. And this is one of them where the employment specialists are made up of 2 mental health treatment teams from which at least 90% of the employment specialist caseload is compromised. We look for data from agencies when we do IPS reviews, and we actually kind of look at percentages of where referrals are coming from. and being in the role of an employment specialist and a program manager, when you have so many more things pulling you in different directions, it's really hard. It's a real challenge to really work with those clinical teams and really provide a really good service to those people on the caseload for an employment specialist. So this is another one of those, critical components about communication that you may, depending what the organization is, have more than this, but to really meet the high fidelity element for this piece of the roadmap, so to speak, we really look at for high fidelity that there's no more than 2 teams that the employment specialist is assigned to. And I think that really helps really build that connection with those clinical staff, whether the case managers or therapists, as well as those supervisors, so that they can get to know you and know what you offer and, share more time within meetings to provide that vocational rehab expertise and, that continued relationship development. Sometimes you just have to be present in those meetings to start building that relationship with the team.
So one of the things you're going to hear from us if you opt to do a fidelity review is tell us which teams refer to you, what percentage of your referrals are from those teams, and what staff do you have assigned to them. So really down to the, who's referring to you, identify the teams that are referring to you, and then make sure there's collaboration with them. Zero exclusion. Ooh, I get to tell my favorite story too.
You did?
I like this. Zero exclusion is based on choice. It's based on when the person says, I'm ready to work, they're ready to work. I mentioned the kind of old school supported employment. We'd say, gee, you have to work on your social skills, or you have to go to resume class, or you have to go to interviewing class, or attend these 5 assessments and do this and that. I don't know about you, but nobody did that to me when I went out to find a job. I got a job and that was my assessment. When I said I was ready to work, I went to work. That's the intent here. That's one of those common sense things. We all ended up assessing ourselves in our first jobs and determining if it was a good one. And the people we serve get to do that too. That being said, we got jobs that hopefully worked within our strengths, were things we were interested in and things we had the ability to do. And so that's where we kind of help to provide education and help people consider some of the options related to where they want to work and is it a good fit. Zero exclusion is also about if a person loses a job, quits a job, you help them get another one, and hopefully right away. There doesn't need to be kind of remediation of anything between the last job and the one upcoming. Although one of the principles talks about the career profile and the fact it should be done over 2 to 3 sessions, and that if a person loses a job, you update the career profile and you include in it, what are the lessons learned? We all learn those lessons going from one to the next. My favorite story here, and it relates to the fact that we are not good predictors of whether a person's going to be successful in work or not. I can say over the years, I've thought some folks just wouldn't make it and they did a glowing job. And others that I thought were going to be slam dunk, I never was able to help successfully in a job. This gal that I had on my caseload was actively using meth. The first couple of meetings that she came in to meet with me for supported employment, she kind of hovered over the chair and you could just see the energy flowing. I mean, she was actively using meth. And she darted out the door and down the hall and said, that's it, I'm done today. And I kind of chased her and scheduled another appointment. Over a period of time, we were able to discuss what she wanted to do. She'd been a drug dealer and a prostitute and decided she wasn't going to do those things anymore. She'd been mugged so many times from behind, she had some pretty serious PTSD, which is understandable. So I asked what she wanted to do. She said, I don't know. So I did do an assessment, a 15-minute one that was online on the WorkSource website. That was a preference, related to preference. And she did a test, 172 questions, and said like, dislike, unsure. Came out that one of the options that might be for her was to be a welder. Keeping in mind that she had pretty hair, nice makeup, dressed to the nines. And she said, well, I think I want to be a welder. And I'm thinking, I don't think so. But I didn't say a word, luckily, because I would have been so very wrong. So helped her to get into college, helped her to do financial aid. She defaulted on loans in the past, and we worked on that. Got into college. Her instructor and she clicked. It was just the nicest thing. He made sure she always had the same seat in the back where nobody could be behind her. He also made sure when she was working in the welding carousel that there was nobody milling around behind her. He let her leave 15 minutes earlier than everybody else. So she didn't have that trigger for her PTSD of somebody milling around behind her. Long story short, she got her 1-year certificate after going for 2 years. What works, works. And she got a job as a scrapyard, at a scrapyard using a cutting torch, complete with the welding visor and the chaps and the leather gloves and the whole bit, and getting dirty. And she had flash burn once, and she had little pieces of metal pop at times and make little burns on her arms, where the sleeve and the glove gapped and all of that stuff, and just absolutely loved it. One of her skills was being able to kind of flip stuff back at the guys when they flip stuff at her. She was not intimidated by them. Got along incredibly well there. And what happened, in addition to the fact that she had a job and was able to do some of the other things she wanted to do because she had income, her adult kids decided they wanted to reconnect with her. Her mother started having things to do with her again. She ended up being part of an NA group that became her family and did so much with them. And last I'd heard, she'd been clean for a number of years. Textbook, the way you'd like to see it go and the way it can go. And if I had said anything early on to discourage her, it wouldn't have gone that way. I was wise in at least the case of shutting up because she was very successful. It did end up being the job for her. I would have been wrong if I thought she couldn't do it at that point in time, and it was amazing, absolutely amazing. So there's my favorite story. Next slide, Darren.
Thank you, Don. I always love that story just because it really focuses on that active listening piece and taking away judgment, which can be a very detrimental barrier to somebody's progress back to employment, back to their family, back to school. So that's, leads us right into choice, which is another important principle of the supported employment model, is that we're really listening to the individual, that the services are created around the individual's preferences and choices, and not the judgment of me as an employment specialist or potentially a case manager, therapist, whoever those people might be. We all know that that extra support network is very important, but we really want to start to find out where that job seeker is at and what would the next steps be. During one IPS review, there was somebody that had some criminal history and some cognitive impairments, and they wanted to be a police officer. And that employment specialist spent a lot of time on research and looking at what things needed to happen and the time commitment that it would take, and all those kind of things that we might look at doing a career change or career introduction. Then that individual was able to choose on their own which path they wanted to do. And then that employment specialist was able to follow another path, which ended up being a warehouse, and be able to get that person a job, competitive employment within a warehouse. So definitely it's that ability to acknowledge those choices or the interest that job seeker has, and what you can do to provide information which can do that guiding path. Just in the previous example with Don and the welder, if there were some judgments, they could have come up early and created more barriers to that transition and that change. Definitely we want to be sensitive to the individual and perhaps cognitive, psychiatric disabilities, recovery issues, and not put people in places where there might be triggers to some of those events that might be detrimental, but at least have those conversations and see where the individual is about taking some ownership and changing, their lives and working together to get that support to make the transition smoother. Let me see, back to you, Dawn.
So individualized job search. I mentioned kind of old school supported employment. I think we used to go out and find out where the job openings were and encourage people to apply, whether it was sort of for them or not. Gee, McDonald's is hiring, here's a job for you. And then wondered why it didn't work well. Gee, funny thing. So IPS, and one of the common search things that it's about is making a job match based on the person's preferences and skills and abilities. Not paying as much attention to the job market, although I will very honestly say that during COVID, if a person said they wanted to be a waitress, when we were all shut down, they didn't exist. And so on occasion, I know employment specialists have had to help people consider close alternatives, things that maybe they could do until the job that they want comes open. So there are some things like that do happen, but it's the exception rather than the rule. So we come up with an individualized job development plan. We discuss, where do you want to work? With whom do you want to work? Who's going to help do what? Can you do a resume on your own? Do you need some assistance? We never try to create dependence. We always hope to create independence. And so all of those kinds of things show up in a job search plan. And hopefully that job search plan is in writing. That's one of the things you can find examples of on the ipsworks.org website. I know sometimes that job search plan ends up being your treatment plan, service plan, program plan, rehab plan, whatever you call it, recovery plan, I should say. It doesn't necessarily matter if it's called a job search plan, but it should have the components of what needs to happen and who's going to do it. On to you, Darren.
Thank you, Don. Another really impactful piece of this process of returning to employment is to provide some education about benefits. And it's always a sensitive subject when you talk about somebody's money and the individual's thoughts about that, which they could be very possessive of some of their state or federal benefits. My experience is people have gone through a lot of trauma to get their Social Security, SSI, SSDI benefits. And we want to be able to honor the choices and balance things when it comes to work and wages, because historically, something is going to change when you have more money coming in, when you're on federal or state benefits, because it's always a needs-based. And there's this model that as your wages go up, well, maybe your reliance on the needs-based program can go down. And for each program, it's a little bit different. But at least to have that opportunity to have that discussion with the person. Hopefully some of that is during that career profile when somebody first comes into the supported employment program, but also as you move through that job search piece. And maybe you're actually looking at maybe a particular job or a particular industry and what the wages are, and do some of those pre-calculations. Even if you don't have access to a certified benefits trainer, using the Pathways to Employment website and just going through that process and then printing out at the end what that general information is so that you have a copy for future reference, but also to give the job seeker a copy of that so they can refer back to that, because as they work with you, their goals may change. I've worked with people on SSDI, gone through their work trial period, looking at through that extended eligibility period, and now they're like making above substantial gainful activity, and that's like, I think I can make more money working and access benefits through the employer for my health needs. Maybe I can do that transition. But it's good to have those conversations early and often, and also document some of that and give some of those folks a tool for that. Definitely, if any individual is referred to the Division of Vocational Rehab, there might be that opportunity to access the certified benefit plan through that. Don and I are also looking at increasing access through different levels of training to FCS contractors across the state, just so that we are all operating on foundational information that we can share with you, and in turn share with the individuals you're working with through the foundational community support model, because so many people come with so many different benefits, and there's so much nuances to each program, whether it's the federal housing, you know, Social Security, SSDI, maybe even VA pensions, or even SNAP. Things, so many things change going through the employment process, and we want to just provide that education, because again, we don't want to create some judgments or barriers that, oh, somebody can't be successful without their food stamps or their housing vouchers, just knowing that those are really important benefits that people have really worked for to maintain. Even if it's Medicaid, and working with somebody once they work for healthcare workers with disabilities to able to maintain that continuity of the Medicaid coverage while they're going through their employment journey. Back to you, Dawn.
So rapid job search. and keep in mind, this is rapid job search. It doesn't say rapid job obtain. I know that there are times when we think that maybe a person's not ready to find a job yet, and that isn't our decision to make. But sometimes people will end up saying, gosh, this is a little scary. Maybe I need to slow down. The intent, apologize, I've got a tickle. Excuse me, goodness. The intent here is that if a person says they want to work, it's respectful to get them out in front of employers as quickly as possible and not make them jump through a lot of hoops and things. This rapid job search could take the form of taking somebody out to talk to an employer to do a job shadow, to help in that decision-making process related to, is this really the job that I want to do? One of the ones that I think back on that I did with a gal on my caseload was she thought she wanted to work with animals in a pet groomer. And so we went and talked to a pet groomer. And we found out about ticks and fleas and repetitive motion injuries and lifting and bathing and dog bites and cat scratches and, you know, other things that when, you know, expressing the glands on a small animal and some of the icky things that you don't even know about until you talk to a groomer. And this gal said, nope, not for me. She wouldn't have known that had she not gone out and done a job shadow. So I think that it doesn't always end up coming straight to mind that part of what this could be is getting out in front of an employer to do an informational interview. It doesn't necessarily have to be to do an interview for the job, but it does have to be getting out in front of employers. For the highest fidelity, it's within 30 days. So in other words, for a score of 5, the average is that people on a person's caseload, on all people's caseload, so the program in general, get out in front of employers within 30 days. Sometimes it may be 5 days. Sometimes they may get jobs in a couple of weeks. If that's, you know, works within what they need to do and what they want to do, that's great. I know that we had a lot of folks on caseloads at the agency that I worked with that came in saying, you know, I don't necessarily care what I do for right now. I got to keep a roof over my head. My long-term goal is this or that. And so we would help them to get those McDonald's jobs or some of the jobs that were just immediate. So they would have some income, as they said they wanted, and then continue working with them to find the job that was a better fit. So those are some of the things to be considered when we're talking about the rapid job search. On to you, Darren.
Thanks, Dawn. I think that's just a real important piece, that getting people out as quickly as possible. And even during COVID, I've been pleasantly surprised by some agencies that there are sometimes a struggle to get out with all the COVID restrictions. But I've also seen some very rapid pieces where the employment specialist is working with the person, and the job seeker is able to go out and meet with the employer, or to kind of focus on something, to kind of go visit a job site, to kind of look at those nuances of what the position is and learn to see if that kind of aligns with the job seeker's goals or not. A big part of IPS is being able to track data. It's a very data-focused process. And one of the tools that we like to see that you can get on the Pathways to Employment website and on IPSworks.org website is a tool that allows the supervisor and manager to actually track face-to-face contact with the hiring authority. So definitely, I hope I speak for Don too, as we really encourage people to adopt and embrace this tool, because I think it's a great learning tool for the employment specialist, but it also gives that ability as a manager to really track and see what your staff are doing within this philosophy of rapid engagement in the community and rapid job search process. It can be a really good tool to really look at how your program functions. And is it more of an assessment type program, or are you aggressively in the community really looking for job opportunities, which is an educational process about competitive employment? Or, you know, somebody with supportive education, you're getting some of that information as well for that. So definitely this model really embraces that community engagement piece. And this element is all about moving forward after you complete that, you know, introduction on intake, career profile over a couple of appointments to learn what the goals of the individual is, and then start working to, you know, make it concrete for the job seeker and be part of that, honoring the individual's goals while also creating, you know, some excitement about able to match some of those goals. One step that I had was really good about developing informational interviews with their job seekers. So that was a great way to be with those hiring authorities, and also getting that bird's eye view of what does your candidate look like during a job interview, and kind of give them those natural supports to make it a really comfortable experience, so that they can take that lesson learned and implement it into, you know, competitive employment opportunities. Back to you, Don.
So systematic job development is sort of what it sounds, that there are steps. There are very definite steps. One of those steps is getting to know the individual so that you know what they're good at, you know what they like, you know what they want to do. But there's also the step of getting to know employers so that you know what they need, you know kind of maybe what jobs are entry level, what are higher level, and what their expectations are. And the only way to really do that is to spend time with people. You got to spend time with people on your caseload, getting to know them over time in order to know kind of the ins and outs, and maybe have them try on a job or two and see how it goes. They can report all they want to that I lost this job because of this, or I lost that job because of that, but you don't really get a chance to wrap your head around it until you get to know them. Sort of the same kind of thing with employers. The IPS talks about the 3 cups of tea, which is based on a book of that title, and talks about in the first cup of tea, you're a visitor, and you're getting to know the person, much like we expect that employment specialists would go out, perhaps with their first session with an employer, and ask questions and listen, that there wouldn't be much in the way of sharing information about your program as yet. You want to know if the employer is a good fit for anybody on your caseload. And typically you go out with somebody in mind. That second visit, you would potentially start, offering some information about what it is that you're doing and who you have on your caseload that might be a good fit. And by the third visit, you're starting to maybe even get to the point of talking to the employer about, I see I've had a tour now and I see this seems to be an area where you have problems keeping staff. What about if we had a person that did just that specific kind of task for you? So a job carving kind of a thing. It only really happens when you get to know the employer well enough to do that. So very much systematic. One of the things that I think is hardest for employment specialists to recognize is that it is about relationship building. It's not just about applying for a job. And I say recognize, that's the wrong word. One of the hardest things to get employment specialists to keep in mind, maybe, is that it's about relationship building. We get lucky on occasion. We get the one and done kinds of scenarios where you help a person apply for a job and they get the job and all is well and good, and they don't need a lot of support perhaps. but a lot of the people that we serve are going to need support. It's easier to provide support if you've built a relationship with that employer and if they trust you and know that you have their best interests at heart, and then also would have the best interest at heart in helping to coach the person so that they learn the job in the way that they do. So the systematic job development is much bigger than just job development. It really is relationship building and all that goes with that. On to you, Darren.
Thanks, Don. I think an important part about this model is relationship building and tracking data. I know that's an oversimplification, but the second part of the systematic job development is tracking what your employment specialists are doing out in the community. And again, this is a scale, and we're not saying to do IPS, you have to do everything in the model all at once, because it definitely takes time. And there's been a lot of hindrance, over the last year of being out in the community to meet some of the demands of this goal. So I've heard some people, reflect that you take different pieces of the model to implement the best you can right now, and it takes practice. And even for an employment specialist to go out and hit high fidelity for this item of 6 employers a week, that takes practice and time and some dedication. And the staff definitely need to be comfortable out in the community doing those face-to-face contacts. So it's definitely something to build upon. Some programs are really good about this, and it's very systematic, and people are able to do that. Some have new staff coming on board, and it takes some time to be comfortable, to be confident, to get that help and the support from the supervisor, to maybe go out in the community as well to see how your staff interact with employers and how they approach sharing information about the supportive employment program. So definitely High Fidelity, again, says use a tracking form. It's all about the tracking what your staff are doing. Have those weekly conversations about how your staff are meeting some of the challenges of working with people, but also tracking what is going on specifically in terms of that job development piece, because it is such a large part of what an employment specialist does under this IPS supported employment model. So definitely gives you that tool as a supervisor, and also do some benchmarking.
Muted.
So relationship with employers. It says I'm muted. That's interesting. Can you guys hear me?
I can.
Okay. Yeah, it actually says I'm muted. That's odd.
Okay.
Sometimes
I can hear you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We've had some definite difficulties with our virtual platforms here lately. So yeah, that always makes me nervous. Relationship with employers is important enough that there are a number of the different principles that are impacted by your relationship with employers. Diversity of employers, diversity of job types, time in the community even, choice of individuals, rapid job search, job development frequency and quality. All of those things have components that relate back to your relationship with employers. And, I know I said that it's awfully important. This gives you some kind of indication that if there are that many principles out of the 25 that have something related to them that's of importance in regards to this relationship with employers, it just kind of underlines the fact. On to you, Darren.
I think I get a really good one. favorite slides.
Thank you, Darren. Very timely. We're about halfway through. There you go.
we are halfway
See you
through,
in 10.
and
So how's everybody doing? We hitting on some stuff that's ending up being helpful? Because we can surely kind of adapt if we need to, and we want it to be useful. So you can either unmute yourself or type in the chat box if you have something that you want to say. I think we got about a minute left of break.
Yep,
I may be
about
asking. What's that?
Yep, about a minute left.
Oh,
I know we covered a lot. Yeah.
We have covered a lot. We do cover a lot. And I know last year folks said that it was a little overwhelming. Part of what we're hoping to do today is make it less overwhelming. And part of that is what Darren mentioned earlier, and I think I did too, that, we're going over the basics. We put a lot of information in the slides so you can read it later and hopefully digest. And then when you need additional training, call us. We'll do that. So it doesn't have to be all at once. It can be a little more in the way of a little more learning at your leisure, if you will. I say that knowing that you're supposed to get the program up and running in pretty short order, but that doesn't mean that you have to get, if you were to do a fidelity review, a score of 5 on everything. You do the best you can do and then continue to improve as you go, just like anything else.
Plus, there's a lot of trainings that we provide throughout the year, from fidelity reviewer training to different elements, job development, job retention, lots of things that you can also access as you're going through program implementation. You're not alone. We're a phone call and email away for support.
Well, and hopefully it'll be an opportunity for you to get to know some of your colleagues here and be able to, to collaborate with them as well. It is intended to be truly a collaborative process. So it looks like we're on time unlimited support, and we should all be back by this point in time for time unlimited support. Yeah, I said we'd have fun. That was really a poor stab at it, but it was like a bad day kind of a thing. One of the hallmarks of IPS, and one of the things that's different perhaps than kind of old school supported employment, is that we used to joke about place and pray. We'd get a person in the job and say, gee, have a great time and see ya, hoping that they would be fine. Well, the IPS folks recognize that's not adequate, because it's not adequate. Various of the folks on our caseloads have significant challenges, and so the best way for them to be successful at a job is potentially if they have some support. I've said at times in the past, we're not independent, we're all interdependent, and we all have somebody we can talk to, or most all of us do. Sometimes the folks on our caseload a little less so, and so part of these follow-along supports is to give a person somebody to talk to, so that they can discuss if things are not going well and why. Best case scenario, if it's a situation where they really do need support, they've allowed us to talk to the employer on their behalf. They've signed that release of information. We've discussed with them in some detail what we would say to the employer so that they can, agree or have us modify what we're going to say. And then we potentially provide them support on site with that employer. Help them get accommodations as needed, help them to build relationships with their coworkers and to do that kind of thing. And when we say time unlimited, AmeriGroup does have a process by which you need to get a person authorized for services. and then reauthorizations every 6 months. But they also have an exception to the rule kind of a process that if a person needs so much support that they use up all of their units within a 6-month period and they still need more, you can apply for more with good documentation and with actual, that documentation proving that there's a need for the person needing some extra units and extra time within that 6-month period. So time unlimited support is important, and within the AmeriGroup process, it can happen. On to you, Darren.
Thanks, Dawn. Time unlimited supports, again, we're really focused on what the individual needs. And within the working structure of the FCS program, matching and dovetailing the services and those contracts and the request for additional services as best we can. We're trying to braid as many funding sources together to provide this piece of the support for retention, but it's also what is helpful for the individual. And again, that could be, I have a survival job right now, but my really goal is to work in the automotive, to kind of look at, providing those ongoing supports, or maybe it's just really focusing on what you can do to help the person keep the job that they're doing, work through maybe benefit issues, or maybe that the job seeker decides they really want a different type of job and help them pivot to that. Or, wage progression is a real critical element of employment, job development, and job retention to help them with, putting those skills and abilities together to focus more on something that's more career orientated or focus on those different needs of the individual. As people come into programs, and many people don't have any income or any supplemental dollars available to live, and they need something right then and there. And we can also provide that additional support to find a more preferable job. During the review, I heard a great case of this one employment specialist finding multiple jobs. One job would end, the person would work with the individual to find another job that was more alignment with the individual's goals. They would start that job, lose it, and go on to the next one. And interesting enough, the person was then looking at certified nurses training as a potential career. So start looking at what that looked like, and if that's separate paid training or training that the employer provided. So being able to pivot, but all the while have that foundation of support, and allows the job seeker to really be in the driver's seat through the reintegration in employment, because some things can work and then some things don't always work for the long term. Just like any of us may have started a job and changed jobs to meet our own personal needs. Job seekers have that same piece if they're in the support employment program, that you can pivot and provide that additional support, all the while, dovetailing with the FCS process, or maybe even the divisional vocational rehab process to get those long-term goals for the individual to be successful. Back to Dawn. Excuse me, I faded there.
So, enhanced supports and collaboration. One of the issues that is important in relationship to the relationship building that IPS focuses on so strongly is collaboration with other agencies that are working with the person. And you'll hear me say, and you'll hear Darren say, building the support team around a person. If they come into the agency, they come into your program, and you're discussing with them in the intake process who else they're working with. Let's say they're working with TANF, the Work First program. The Work First program actually has a participation component. And one of the things that's important to know is if you're working with somebody on TANF, the work they're doing with you can help to help them to meet their participation requirements within their TANF, their individual responsibility plan, their IRP. So if you are going out and doing job search with the person a couple of hours a week, that couple of hours a week lends itself to that participation. Obviously, then it's important to collaborate with that TANF worker in order to make sure that within the IRP, you have a place there. That's also going to require you collaborating with them periodically to say what progress the person's making towards becoming employed. But it makes a difference to the person if you do that. It makes a difference to their plan within TANF. And there are other examples like that. I've worked with folks that were, had CPS cases, and finding a job, maintaining a job shows that level of responsibility can help with a CPS case potentially. If they're in supportive housing services and let's say they need assistance with, doing the grocery shopping so that they have some food to be able to sustain that energy level for work, or clothing that they might need to buy in order to be appropriately clothed for work, or those kinds of things, you're going to want to collaborate with them to see if they can assist to make those things happen. In a behavioral health agency, I know the agency that I worked for had substance use disorder services as well as mental health services, and we collaborated on a regular basis. And in the case of our chart, electronic health record, that was the word I was trying to think of and stumbling over. We had certain levels of access to either side. That's kind of the education for me related to their, for lack of a better word, because I don't know the right terminology, firewalls between one program and another to maintain confidentiality. But that can be waived if there are people on your caseload that are also in another on another caseload potentially. So important to, incredibly important to collaborate with the other agencies that are working with the person. On to you, Darren.
Thanks, Dawn. On the IPF side, there is another piece of that time and limited support philosophy. This one is more about the data tracking, that it's real important to maintain that relationship with the job seeker as they're starting employment. And for a very high fidelity, there's these specific targets that we look for to see if this is occurring. So face-to-face contact within 1 week before starting a job, 3 days after starting employment, and weekly for the first month, and at least monthly for a year or more. Just data tells us that having this close, robust relationship with the job seeker results in, one, competitive employment starts, but also in terms of people maintaining their employment, able to, Don and I and our roles, our IPS reviewers, were able to go in and, see some of this data firsthand and really hear robust stories of how, this level of involvement really leads to people maintaining employment. Because sometimes things can really change on the job, and if you have this robust contact and people are able to reach out to the employment specialist, there could be, some of the other things maybe avoided, or to kind of even help people with more robust communication with the supervisor, attendance, multiple different aspects of a job start. So definitely in terms of working closely with folks, research shows that those people are able to maintain employment. And this is definitely a challenge for programs to work around, particularly during COVID. But it's one of those additional metrics that we really encourage supervisors to track and use some of the forms at IPS Works or Pathways to Employment to really see what's going on prior to somebody starting a job and actually starting work as well.
So how are we doing?
We made it. The element.
We did. Nice. Anybody have any questions at this point in time? And, like we've said, you can either use the chat, you can raise your hand, you can ask them verbally, whatever works best. It's up to you. It's a matter of choice for you. We're respecting choice today.
Yes, we are. Well, without any questions, we're going to pivot a little bit and look at the roles and responsibilities of a supervisor in employment services. I know people wear many hats, but definitely the executive leadership influences high fidelity, the culture of the organization influences high fidelity, and the supervisor manager also influences high fidelity and can really be that champion to implement changes and changing that culture from one aspect of the service continuum to match up with the IPS fidelity. So I'll turn it over to you to launch in, Dawn.
Sounds good. So I'm not telling anybody anything that they don't know, but the role of a supervisor is huge. The role of the right supervisor is going to make all the difference in the world related to your program. And one of the things to consider, and I know within agencies that sometimes programs have to start a supervisor, supervising multiple programs. Within the IPS Fidelity Scale, there are questions related to that. How much other supervision is the person doing? How many other people do they need to supervise? Do they actually have the chance to supervise? Because part of that is related to what Darren's mentioned a number of times, the data tracking tools. And do you have a chance to look at them? Do you have a chance to look at the job development log and see that each employment specialist has gone out to talk to 6 different employers during the week? Do you have the chance to look at some of the progress notes? There's one of the fidelity items that talks about mentoring and field mentoring. And what it's referring to there is actually going out in the field with one of the people that you supervise and observing them talk to employers when they're doing job development and providing some feedback and some guidance related to that. There is job development training that we're doing through part of this series of trainings for new agencies within the SUD seed grant. But there's also job developer community practice calls once a month, where job developers get together and they talk about their trials and challenges and successes. Pat Tucker's doing some additional job development training, and we've got a series of 3 of those, and I think we're into our second set. She's also going to talk about some job retention principles. So there's lots of training for supervisors to get, lots of training for the employment specialists to get related to job development and things along that line. Once again, I know I'm preaching to the choir. What makes a good supervisor? Job knowledge, leadership qualities, being self-motivated, being a good mentor. I'm sure you have a lengthy list of what makes a good supervisor. And those are things that can be hard to find. I know that there's agencies in the past set or this past series of contracts that we did that said they did have a difficult time finding that. We also have the opportunity to help you send out job notices. And so if that comes up as a need, if you're having troubles finding an employment specialist or the supervisor, let us know, and I do believe we can send out the job notice for you. On to you, Darren.
Thanks, Don. IPS also has an element about supervisor role and responsibility. As Don had mentioned, if you're a supervisor with many hats, it's really hard to do a really good job in terms of providing the support to your staff and the job seekers and all those internal communications. So definitely they have a ratio of 1 full-time supervisor not being responsible more for 10 employment specialists. Definitely that's a large workload in itself, but it's also just having that balance of what the program leader can do, because a supervisor definitely is a champion for the program. They're doing internal and external communication and education with staff to really change the culture, to get into that aspect of competitive employment is very important for job seekers and the population of services that you provide, and to how to weave those different services together to really provide a robust wraparound model to make people successful out there. So definitely, this is kind of one of my fun favorite photos. It's incredible that somebody was able to make a robot like that. But definitely, a lot
Darren,
of different aspects of this role.
It's Johnny Five.
Johnny Five.
Johnny Five. What was the movie he was from? First person to put it in the chat, they'll get a prize. I don't know what it'll be, but what movie was that from? I can't recall.
It sounds familiar. I can't even remember.
And I wish I remember what it was, because it was a very cute movie. Series of them, actually. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Oh, there's somebody answered.
Yeah.
What
Short circuit.
You're right. Good job. I forgot. What the door. Thanks, Gal. I'll be back your prize.
Yeah. Back to you, John.
So when we're talking about doing the work, and Darren's mentioned several times the collecting of data, if it wasn't documented, it didn't happen. How many times have you heard that? I swear I think I've heard it in my sleep on occasion. We've got to monitor. We've got to collect data. We've got to use some of the forms in order to keep track of what's going on. So we want to monitor number and type of job placements from within the program, which is separate from, I said earlier, there's one standard that says the whole agency should be monitoring how many people are employed. This particular one relates to just within the program. Number of employer contacts per week, there's the standard that says there needs to be 6. And so you got to be able to document that someplace. And when I say someplace, I want you to consider that if it's documented only in the progress notes, and if you're the supervisor, you have to read every progress note in order to pick out the 6 per employment specialist that happen per week. So there are tracking forms that make it a whole lot easier as a supervisor to keep track of that. And actually for the person too, for the staff person to keep track of where they've gone and talk to whom. Length of time between program entry and date of first employer contact. That relates back to the one that you hope to get people out in front of employers within 30 days of entry into the program. That's what that's relevant to. Percentage of time in the community, we didn't discuss as yet, but there's a standard that says that employment specialists should spend 65% of their time at least out in the community, with the thought being you're not going to help people find jobs with employers if you're not talking to employers, and you're not really developing a good relationship with the employer unless you're doing it face-to-face. And we know that COVID has stood in the way of that here lately, but knock on wood, getting better. Documentation, quality, and quantity. What I encourage agencies to do when I go in and do initial training is to look at the 25 principles and then ask yourself, how are we documenting that? So the first one is a principle about caseload size, which says 20 or fewer people per caseload. That one's probably one of the easiest ones to document. I think we've all got caseload lists when we've got a caseload. Harder one to track would be that 65% of the time in the community. How are you tracking that? Does the employment specialist have a calendar that's accessible to the supervisor, that the supervisor can look at? And, are they putting down in it when they have a block of time, 10 to 12 employer contact in the community, 1 to 2 spent time with Don Miller on my caseload out at the library? I mean, are they documenting in such a way as it becomes apparent that they're out in community doing things? So documentation, quality, and quantity. Updating the career profile is one of the things under that principle that's supposed to happen when a person has maybe lost a job and you want to document those lessons learned, or maybe they're done with college and now they're starting to look for a job, and what are they looking for? So looking at each one of those principles and how is it documented. That career profile, especially if you have an electronic health record, pretty easy to put in the career profile and the date of the first one. How do you show that it's been 2 to 3 sessions that the person or the staff person spent with the person to get to know them? Probably in progress notes. But then when you go to update the form, is there a different date on that? I know the electronic health record we had at the place that I worked, if you pulled up a new one, it would default in all the information from the old one. You made the changes you wanted to make, and then you saved it again with that new date, which would show that you'd updated it as needed with some of the information needed. Individualized follow along, what the person needs, how often. IPS recommends a job search plan and a follow along or job support plan. Obviously, given the fact that we work in a lot of the work that's done is in behavioral health agencies, you have to have a treatment plan, recovery plan, whatever you call it. So that's part of the documentation too, and may include part of what's the support. But how are you documenting each one of the things? And if you have any question at all, if you need examples of forms, if you've looked on IPS Works or Pathways and you don't find those forms and you want some assistance from us, feel free to reach out. And then tracking forms are a must for efficiency and time management. And they really are. Having been a supervisor, without them, I couldn't have gotten done nearly as much as I would have wanted. When a staff person was new, I did read all of their progress notes and sign off of them. But at some point in time when they were proficient, I ceased to do that. And those tracking forms became even more important then because they were putting in things like job contacts and with whom and that kind of thing. So reach out if you need some examples. On to you, Darren.
Thank you, Don. And these are, considerations and tools to implement. And it's great when you're having new staff to kind of use some of this information in your onboarding process, but also during unit meetings to talk about the forms and how people are able to embrace them. I know there's a lot of demands in people in direct service roles, and you're adding even more documentation and more forms, which can take more time because you're learning a new way of providing supportive employment work and services. But over the long term, as Don mentioned, it's really a quality assurance tool to make sure that you are following the IPS guidelines and providing quality services. And through any governing body that looks at implementation and evidence-based practices, it's all about that quality. So these are some tools to use. They do take time to use and master and just take some time to collect, but we really encourage them because it really does simplify some things, whether it's setting goals at your unit meeting and looking at community time and employer contact, individualized supervision. These are all meant to kind of raise everybody up to a higher level of functioning in the role of supportive employment specialist and adhering to IPS, but it's also the relationship you're building with your staff and using tools to monitor people's progress. I really believe that there's so many passionate people in this field, and we're really wanting to channel that kind of energy into meeting the IPS different elements. And over time, I think these tools are used and implemented that you will see higher placement rates and even better job retention rates within your program. And I can't emphasize enough, if things aren't written down and they're not organized and the tools aren't used, sometimes, you don't know if it happened or not. And that's what some of these tools really allow that supervisor to track from all the multiple elements that we've talked about a little bit earlier. Back to you, Don.
Okay. So we're talking supervisor roles and responsibilities. One of those is weekly supported employment supervision. And IPS kind of goes a step past that. They want to see that supervisors and employment specialists are talking about the situations with individuals on their caseloads, maybe challenges that they're having and working through those, maybe, brainstorming about which employers might have the kind of jobs that a person's looking for. I know if you look, when I talked about the IPSworks.org website having some videos, one of the ones that I think they've got, and if not, I can get you the link for the one that I'm thinking of, it was a vocational unit meeting. And so in that case, group supervision. And it showed a team of individuals talking about a person that had difficulties with a job. Every time she kind of came up to the job or the job interview, she'd sort of cancel. Why was that? How could they help? They discussed the fact that she had a DVR counselor and that she had a mom that was very involved, and you know, the mom was somebody that was supportive, and so maybe she could go to dinner with the mom the night before. And so those are the kinds of things that they want to see you discuss in the supervision and in the team meetings. The actual staffing of cases and how to help to move forward when somebody is stuck. On to you, Darren.
We all get stuck, and we really get through being stuck with our coworkers, our supervisor, our managers, to really do that problem-solving piece. And when I was running a supported employment program, part of my agenda was case consultation, and go around and definitely have staff talk about some of the challenges that are happening, because you really want to honor the struggles that employment specialists have working with people, and have that time to be very constructive about it. I think having an agenda for the meeting, having it structured, is really important. Since there's so many elements at play for IPS, every week we would look at a different element of IPS and rotate through them. It's a great way for staff to really have some hands-on discussion about the different elements and look at different strategies. I found that very helpful. You know, depending on what's going on in the agency, sometimes we'd have to rotate through things, but at least having that kind of roadmap for what kind of meeting you want to lead and the different elements of that meeting to address. As Don mentioned, I think consultations is great. Job development, this is a real key aspect of IPS, community engagement, working with employers, learning about that, having that designated, dedicated discussion, I think is really important. Plus the updates. How did it go at the case manager or therapist or whatever those other units, so that we can share from different teams what kind of things are going on, and how people are supportive. It's a great way to learn about staff that are transitioning, and maybe that job seeker needs more support, or if there's other transitions going on. This is not an administrative meeting per se, where you're just going to talk about administrative things at the agency. We all know that's very important. But the really unit meeting is going to focus on those IPS functions: job development, employer relationships, mentoring, being out in the community, how we're doing with some of those elements of IPS, and if there's some challenges, what can we do differently? Also, a big piece, for many organizations who have contracts with DVR is, you know, giving some updates about that. Where are people at in the referral process, the eligibility process, SDOPs, SDORs, those type of things. How are you meeting those? You know, contractual obligations as well is a great thing to implement into the meeting, just so it's a clear expectation that these are some of the things that were being talked about on a continued basis. And you really learn a lot about what your staff are doing, and it gives them that time to share. Also, talk about successes. I think this is a great piece to add to the agenda, because people are working so hard that there could be multiple successes, not always about job placement, which we really encourage and love. That's a great celebration. But there could also be some of those other changes and transitions or supports that people are encountering, and build upon that success as they go through, you know, that journey to employment through your supportive employment program. Back to you, Dawn.
Oops. So Darren, I'm going to say one of the challenges that we maybe are going to have today is it already looks like the timer for the webinar is counting down. So if we get bumped out, there's a reason for that. You gotta love virtual programs, don't you?
Wow.
It's interesting. Yeah. So the supervisor is intended to communicate with other team member leads. They are intended to be, and I think Darren mentioned your champion. So if you're having problems communicating with DVR, potentially they're the ones that go out to the DVR supervisor and try to encourage collaboration there. If they're, well, I worked for an agency where we had new leadership a time or two or three, and the supervisor really was the one that helped a new leadership to come on board related to the importance and value of employment as a recovery strategy. And so that supervisor has that champion role in addition to all the other things that they do. I know one of the things that I did as a supervisor was I worked with the supervisors for the therapy team and case manager teams to talk about, this specific clinician doesn't make referrals. Why is that? Could we do some more education? Or this, this clinician refers a lot, and kudos to them, and please let them know how marvelous that is, and we're collaborating well, and whatever. So the good as well as some of the other things, obviously. On to you, Darren.
Thanks, Don. I think that is so important, that really the supervisor can really be a champion and really change the culture or open up discussions of things where there's some of that internal challenges. And it's so important as an employment specialist, supervisor, or manager that you have that connection with the CEO. That's part of the IPS model, where the CEO actually takes that responsibility to be able to talk with the employment services program person, that contact, that lead, that champion, so that you have that access to executive leadership about some of the challenges or barriers that you're facing. And it also gives you that opportunity to kind of maintain the messaging about IPS and really educate other folks, whether it's therapists or case managers or even the medical staff, what zero exclusion really is, what is competitive employment, and how that means, how all these different elements impact the service delivery that you're providing. I really see it as a cultural change, I think for the better for many agencies, but it's also you as that champion to be able to be that main communicator and how to channel that information and control some of the messaging in that role. It's very tough, and definitely it's stepping out sometimes. I found it myself stepping outside my comfort zone, and it was always nice to go back. This is what the evidence-based practice says, and this is how we're going to implement this and adhere to the different elements. Over to you, Don.
I think we've talked about interaction with leadership quite a bunch. Your role as a supervisor is that championing and teaching and monitoring and reporting back up, because the only way a program gets to continue going is if they're doing what they're intended to do. It's letting leadership know when you have challenges. It's asking for that support related to sharing success stories, a variety of things. Back to you, Darren.
Sure, thanks. It's definitely that two-way street of communication to share information internally. I think it's also really helpful to do it externally. Definitely, it's been a challenge, this year with stakeholders and DVR. But we've also seen some really good examples of people using Zoom and media platforms to maintain that communication with the different offices to support the job seeker, and how referrals are managed, and just starting that connection. There's a review I just did this year. It was their baseline review, and one of the recommendations was to meet and work with some of the agencies that are providing that behavioral health component. And this year they actually had a case manager within the IPS Fidelity review that we could talk to. So those steps to kind of do more integration and open up those channels for communication, which is real important. And some agencies are really good with working with WorkSource, maybe with the Work First department, Departments of Correction. I know I've had staff who did those monthly letters to kind of let people know that their job seeker was in compliance with those guidelines. Maybe there's ALTA is also involved and looking at those community services that somebody might be eligible for to really kind of braid and get those additional supports that somebody could be successful and leverage whatever those services are with ALTA or DVR or even TANF to kind of maintain that support to help people on that transition. And just overall trying to meet the needs of that individual to be supportive and to be successful. Back to you, Dawn.
So marketing your program. There are great examples out there of brochures, of flyers, of things along that line, and certainly you can find them on the Pathways to Employment, potentially also ipsworks.org website. There are examples that we can provide to you, but an important part of marketing is that plan. How are you going to get the information out? How are you going to let other agencies know what you're doing? Let the agency, or excuse me, the teams within your agency know what you're doing. Are you going to let individuals know what you're doing? How are you going to market those services? And I think that's done a variety of ways. I know one of the agencies that I work with in Spokane has great big billboards that are really pretty effective and you know, really convey a message related to what it is that they're doing. I know that there are agencies that maybe have you know, food delivery programs that put a flyer in the food boxes that they send out to individuals. I know that word of mouth ends up being a pretty huge way of marketing your services. And I think, in fact, is one of the best ways. If you're doing a really good job, the people you're providing services to will talk to others in the waiting room. They'll tell them about what it is that you're doing and how wonderful it is, and that they want to be referred as well. So I think just doing that really good service is one of the best ways you can market your program. Other stakeholders potentially can be part of it. DVR, I know, refers people to foundational community supports. And if you know them well and they know the good service you provide, you're one of the agencies that they'll mention to individuals that need to be referred to an FCS program. Once again, you know, I think Darren mentioned TANF for Work First. The agency that I worked for here in Moses Lake had a great relationship with the TANF case managers, and they referred on a pretty regular basis, and they talked about it. And I went to the local planning area meetings with the Work First program and shared information about supported employment and what it looked like and who was eligible and that kind of thing. So start planning how you're going to market if you haven't already, because it's such an important component. And reach out to your colleagues if you need suggestions for brochures and things along that line, or reach out to Darren and I if you need that information. Happy to help. On to you, Darren.
Hey, Don, I know it looks like we got about maybe less than 4 minutes left of the presentation. I'm wondering if we should jump to questions, and if anybody has questions and our referral information or contact information. Sorry.
I think that's a grand idea. Thank you for bringing it up. Absolutely. Because I know the timer is counting down and says we're 8 minutes in over, which we aren't. Oh. It always makes me nervous that it's going to kick us back out again. And we mentioned early on that we put a lot of verbiage in the slides so that you can read them and get an understanding of what it is by reading the slide, or go back and remind yourself of what they had to say, you know, either way. So are there questions at this point in time? And either ask them verbally or via the chat or whatever works best for you.
Yeah, some of the slides I'm going.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just talking, some of the slides I'm just going through is focusing on a supervisor's role, mentoring, and how important it is with goals. So I'm just kind of going through some of the slides quickly while people are thinking about any questions that they might have to share.
I was going to mention that Darren and I have one more training with you on June 8th, isn't it, Darren? Isn't that the date? So be prepared to have someone from your agency attend that as well. And then has Lisa done Lisa's going to be doing a job development training too, correct, Darren?
Yes.
I
think that's
coming?
June 15th. I have to send out a flyer for that for folks and a meeting link, but I think that's going to be June 15th.
Okay. So 2 more to get on your calendar. We'll get that information sent out as quickly as possible so that you're able to get registered or have someone register for the trainings. Thank you for your patience today, for your attention, for attending. As trainers, it's always heartening when folks end up attending the trainings that you've scheduled. There's a plus. If you have questions after this, there's our contact information. Please feel free to send any questions to us, and we can share with the group as needed so that the answer isn't just for you, it's for kind of the group. One last shot at any questions, and I don't see any at this point in time.
We'll have to come up with another movie trivia next time.
I think so. Kel did so well with Short Circuit. Up here, I see a question or two. What do we got? Oh, thank yous. You're welcome. Absolutely. I hope it was beneficial to you today. That's always our hope. And truth be told, I think Darren mentioned the idea of getting feedback. Please do give us feedbacks. We have 2 more trainings to do. We want them to be a good use of your time. And so if you have feedback for us, let us know.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Thank you for
much.
Time to
And Darren, I think you're the guy that gets to end the webinar.
Okay, thank you all today. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. We'll see you again in a couple weeks on June 8th to do additional IPS and supervisor information. I think that's with tools. So take care, everybody, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Take care.